cries of the mortals echoed through the heavens, a cacophony of despair and grief that tore through the fabric of the cosmos. Their voices, trembling with sorrow and rage, reached the ears of Marduk, the supreme god of the divine race. High in his celestial throne, Marduk listened, his brow furrowing with a deep, simmering anger. The world below had been ravaged by the giants and the sacred pacts. Ancient agreements meant to keep the balance between the seven races had been shattered. Marduk's golden eyes blazed like twin suns as he rose from his throne, his form towering and resplendent, a figure of unmatched power and authority. The air around him crackled with energy, and the very stones of his palace trembled at his fury. The giants had defied the will of the gods, and for that, they would pay dearly. With a wave of his hand, Marduk summoned his fellow deities to the Hall of Eternal Judgment, a place where the gods gathered to make decisions that would shape the fate of the world. The call reverberated through the heavens, a command that could not be ignored. One by one, the gods appeared, their forms shimmering into existence like stars igniting in the void. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, arrived first, her beauty both enchanting and terrible. Her eyes, usually soft and alluring, now glittered with the cold light of battle. She sensed the gravity of the situation and knew that this would be no ordinary council. Enlil, the god of storms and wind, followed, his presence marked by the low rumble of thunder and the howling of distant gales. Enlil's face was stern, his lips pressed into a thin line as he took his place beside Ishtar. Next came Enki, the god of wisdom and water, his form fluid and ever-changing, like a river that flows through the ages. His eyes were deep pools of knowledge, reflecting the ancient secrets of the universe. Enki's expression was calm, but there was an undercurrent of concern in his gaze as he regarded Marduk's thunderous countenance. Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom, entered with a scroll in hand, his brow furrowed in contemplation. He was followed by Shamash, the god of the sun and justice, who radiated a warmth that contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. Sin, the god of the moon, moved like a shadow beside Shamash, his pale light a cool counterpoint to the sun's brilliance. Tiamat, the goddess of wrath and the primordial seas, arrived last, her entrance heralded by the roar of waves and the deep, guttural sounds of the ocean's depths. She was a being of immense power, her form shifting and terrible, her eyes glowing with a dark and ancient fury. As the gods took their places, the Hall of Eternal Judgment fell into a heavy silence, the air thick with anticipation. Marduk stood at the center, his gaze sweeping over the assembled deities. When he spoke, his voice was like the roar of 1,000 storms, commanding and absolute. The giants have violated the sacred pacts, Marduk began, his voice carrying the weight of divine authority. They have attacked the humans, slaughtering them without mercy, and in doing so, they have defied the will of the gods. This cannot stand. A murmur rippled through the hall as the gods exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from anger to concern. It was Enlil who spoke first, his voice low and rumbling like distant thunder. "They have grown bold," Enlil said, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps they believe that the pacts no longer bind them. They must be reminded of their place." Ishtar nodded in agreement, her gaze fierce. "They have forgotten the fear of the gods. We must show them that we are still the rulers of this world, that our wrath is something to be feared." Marduk turned to Enki, the wisest among them. "What say you, Enki? What counsel can you offer in this time of crisis?" Enki's gaze was steady as he met Marduk's eyes. The giants are powerful, but they are not invincible. However, a direct confrontation could lead to further chaos. We must be strategic in our response. An example must be made, but we must also consider the consequences of our actions. Marduk nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You are right, as always, Enki. We must strike, but we must do so in a way that restores order, not deepens the rift between the races." At that moment, a new presence entered the hall, one that commanded attention even among the gods. Anzu, the mighty bird god, strode forward, his wings folded, his beak sharp and gleaming. Anzu was a warrior of renown, known for his ferocity in battle and his unwavering loyalty to the divine race. Marduk's gaze fell upon Anzu, and he addressed him with a voice that brooked no disobedience. "Anzu, you are our greatest warrior. You shall lead the army of the divine race against the giants. Teach them a lesson they will never forget. Drive them back to their mountains, and remind them of the consequences of defying the gods." Anzu bowed deeply, his wings brushing the ground. "As you command, Marduk. I will gather our forces and prepare for the attack. The giants will tremble before the might of the divine race." Satisfied, Marduk turned his attention back to the council. "This meeting is adjourned. We will strike at dawn." With that, the gods began to disperse, their forms dissolving into mist and light as they returned to their respective domains. But as Anzu left the hall, a shadow passed over his heart. He had never feared battle, but something about this task felt different, an unease he could not shake. Still, he pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the coming conflict. The night before the battle. The night was heavy with anticipation, the stars hanging low in the sky as if they, too, were watching the events unfold. In the heart of the divine city of Eridu, Anzu gathered the celestial legions, their armor gleaming in the pale light of the moon. The warriors of the divine race stood ready, their weapons forged from stardust and their spirits burning with righteous fury. But Anzu, their leader, was not among them. Instead, he had retreated to the great hall, where the echoes of the gods' voices still lingered in the air. There, he found a goblet of ambrosia, the nectar of the gods, placed upon a marble pedestal. It was a gift, a reward for his impending victory, and its allure was impossible to resist. Anzu grasped the goblet, the cool metal comforting against his feathers, and brought it to his beak. He drank deeply, the ambrosia sliding down his throat like liquid fire, warming him from within. But as the golden liquid flowed through his veins, it brought with it a sensation of peace, of lethargy, that began to cloud his mind. The weight of the coming battle faded, replaced by a comforting haze. Anzu drank again and again, until the goblet was empty and his mind was adrift in a sea of intoxication. He had faced countless battles, had slain monsters and demons alike, but now, in this moment of stillness, he felt no urgency, no need to prepare. The warriors of the divine race waited outside, their spirits eager for the fight. But their leader was lost to the world, slumped against the walls of the hall, his eyes glazed and unfocused. The night deepened, the stars moved across the sky, and the hour of the attack drew closer. But Anzu remained unmoving, his thoughts dulled by the effects of the ambrosia. Marduk's fury. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Marduk stood upon the walls of his celestial palace, his eyes fixed on the world below. The time had come for the divine army to march against the giants, to deliver the punishment they so richly deserved. But as he waited, the minutes stretching into hours, no army appeared. A terrible sense of foreboding settled over Marduk as he realized that something was amiss. With a thought, he descended from the walls and entered the great hall where Anzu was supposed to be preparing for battle. What he found there filled him with a rage unlike anything he had ever known. Anzu lay sprawled upon the floor, the empty goblet beside him, his chest rising and falling with the slow, even breaths of deep sleep. The ambrosia had done its work, and the mighty bird god, the chosen leader of the divine army, had fallen into a drunken stupor, heedless of the sacred task he had been given. For a moment, the entire cosmos seemed to hold its breath, the very air charged with the promise of divine retribution. Marduk's golden eyes narrowed, his hand clenching into a fist as a storm of emotions roiled within him: betrayal, anger, and above all, an overwhelming sense of disappointment. Anzu. Marduk's voice thundered through the hall, reverberating off the marble walls with a force that shook the very foundations of the palace. The sound was enough to rouse Anzu from his stupor, and he blinked up at Marduk, confusion and fear clouding his gaze. Marduk, Anzu stammered, his wings trembling as he struggled to rise. I can explain. Silence. Marduk's voice cut through Anzu's feeble attempts at explanation. You have betrayed the trust of the gods, Anzu. You were given a sacred task, and you have failed. Because of you, the giants will go unpunished, their crimes unanswered. This is an unforgivable act of disobedience. Anzu's eyes widened in horror as he realized the full extent of his transgression. Please, Marduk, have mercy. I was overcome by the ambrosia. It was a moment of weakness, but I can still lead the army. Give me another chance, and I will. Enough! Marduk's voice was cold as the void, his expression as hard as stone. You had your chance, and you squandered it. There will be no mercy for traitors. At that moment, the other gods, sensing the disturbance, materialized within the hall, their expressions a mixture of shock and concern as they took in the scene before them. Ishtar, Enlil, Enki, and the others stood in a loose circle around Marduk and Anzu, their eyes flickering with uncertainty. Marduk, Enki began, his voice calm and measured. We understand your anger, but perhaps there is a way to resolve this without resorting to extreme measures. Anzu made a mistake, yes, but he is still one of us. Let us not be hasty. But Marduk was beyond reason. His wrath was a force of nature, unstoppable and all-consuming. He has betrayed us, Enki. He has betrayed the divine race. And for that, he must pay the ultimate price. Before anyone could intervene, Marduk raised his hand, and from his palm erupted a bolt of lightning, brighter than the sun and hotter than the core of a star. It struck Anzu with a deafening crack, the force of the impact sending the bird god crashing to the ground. Anzu let out a piercing cry as the lightning coursed through his body, his feathers burning, his flesh searing. The hall was filled with the smell of ozone and charred flesh, and the other gods recoiled in shock at the suddenness and brutality of Marduk's action. Anzu, Tiamat's voice rang out, filled with anguish as she rushed forward, her wrathful form trembling with a mixture of fury and despair. She knelt beside her brother, her eyes burning with tears as she cradled his charred body in her arms. Marduk stood over them, his expression unyielding, his eyes still ablaze with fury. This is the fate of all who defy the will of the gods, he declared, his voice echoing through the hall like the final toll of a bell. Let this be a lesson to any who would betray us. But Tiamat was not cowed by his words. She looked up at Marduk, her eyes filled with a hatred so deep it seemed to reach into the very core of her being. You have gone too far, Marduk, she hissed, her voice trembling with barely restrained rage. Anzu was my brother, and you have slain him without mercy, without giving him a chance to atone. This is unforgivable. Marduk's gaze hardened as he met Tiamat's eyes. He brought this upon himself. You know the consequences of defying the divine order. But Tiamat shook her head, her grief transforming into a seething fury that threatened to engulf her entirely. You will regret this, Marduk. You may be the supreme god, but even you are not beyond retribution. You have made an enemy today, and I swear on the primordial seas, you will pay for what you have done. The other gods watched in tense silence, their eyes flicking between Marduk and Tiamat, unsure of what would happen next. They could feel the tension in the air, a palpable force that crackled with the potential for violence. It was Enlil who finally stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Tiamat, we understand your grief, but this is not the way. Anzu's death is a tragedy, but let us not compound it with further bloodshed. We must find a way to move forward, to heal the rift that has been created. Ishtar nodded in agreement, her gaze softening as she looked at Tiamat. Your pain is great, sister, but remember that we are all bound by the same laws. Anzu's actions endangered the balance, and while Marduk's response was harsh, it was not without cause. Tiamat's eyes flicked towards Ishtar, her expression still hard with anger, but there was a flicker of something else in her gaze, a deep, profound sadness that seemed to dull the edge of her fury. Perhaps you are right, Tiamat said slowly, her voice thick with emotion. But I cannot forgive this. Not now. Not ever. With that, Tiamat rose to her full height, her form towering and terrible as she lifted her brother's body in her arms. Without another word, she turned and walked away from the hall, her footsteps echoing through the silence, like the tolling of a distant bell. The other gods watched her go, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and resignation. When she had gone, Marduk turned to the remaining gods, his expression once again calm, though there was a lingering darkness in his gaze. "The giants will still face our wrath," he said, his voice steady. "And Zeus' failure does not change that. We will find another to lead our forces, and the pacts will be enforced." Enki nodded, though his expression was troubled. "We will do what must be done, Marduk. But remember, the bonds between us are fragile. Let us tread carefully, lest we fracture them beyond repair." Marduk inclined his head in acknowledgement, though his eyes remained distant, fixed on some unseen point in the heavens. "So be it," he said quietly. "The balance must be maintained, no matter the cost." And with that, the gods departed, leaving Marduk alone in the great hall, his thoughts as turbulent as the storm that raged outside. The world had changed that day, the divine order shaken by the events that had unfolded. The giants would be punished, the pacts would be upheld, but the wounds left by Anzu's death would not soon heal. High above, in the vast expanse of the heavens, the stars dimmed, as if mourning the loss of one of their own. The universe, once stable and secure, now seemed fragile, teetering on the edge of a precipice, with the gods themselves uncertain of what the future would hold. And in the depths of the primordial seas, Tiamat wept for her brother, her tears mingling with the waters of creation, a grief so deep it threatened to consume her entirely. But beneath that grief, there was a growing darkness, a seed of hatred that would one day grow into something terrible, something that would challenge the very foundations of the world. For the gods, the war with the giants was only the beginning. The true battle, the battle that would decide the fate of the cosmos, was yet to come.